Dealing with kidney, we're going to start with the gross anatomy and work our way down. When we talked about the kidney, we have a renal cortex. That is the part outside this region we call the renal pyramids. The medulla is everything in the middle. Inside the medulla, we do have renal pyramids. These, you'll notice, are a different color than outside. That's true in real life, too, because of how they're different. We do have the same cortical material extending in between the pyramids, and these are called renal columns. When I have finished manufacturing my urine, I'm going to collect it in a drainage system located in this renal medulla and leaving through the hilus of the kidney. That's this gap where the blood vessels come in and the ureter goes out. Our collecting system is going to drain first into a minor calyx. Lots of these minor calyces, and I'm going to switch to this one. We see several minor calyces that would have been attached to any renal pyramid. You can see the tip of pyramids coming from on the deep side of this region. The minor calyces all drain into a widened area called a major calyce. So this would be a major calyx. This would be a major calyx. They all end up draining into a widened basin called the renal pelvis that ends up running out through the ureter. When we go back to the blood supply, this one is almost easier to see over here. So I have now a blood supply because I'm going to have to supply blood to the inside of my kidney. As you remember, the kidney works by shoving water and everything dissolved out of it into a tube system, and the tubes bring all of the good stuff back out of the tubes into my bloodstream. So we call this, where I have a capillary bed where the water and dissolved stuff leaves the bloodstream, but before I leave the kidney I have to bring it back in, is called a portal system. When we look at the blood supply, we'll start with the artery. We have a renal artery that breaks off into a segmental artery, different, quote, segments of the kidney. Some people tend to call, after these segmentals, they will call this part a lobar artery, and they literally refer to each renal pyramid as a, quote, lobe of the kidney. So I will have my lobar arteries that break off into an interlobar artery in between the lobes that always branches off into an arcuate artery that arches across the top of the pyramid. These arteries that arch across the top of the pyramid send off all kinds of blood vessels heading out into the cortex. Some people call them cortical radiate arteries, or they can also be called the interlobular arteries. The whole job of these interlobular arteries is to supply blood to a nephron. And so if we move to a nephron, we had our arcuate artery coming across the top of the pyramid. The arcuate gave us an interlobular or cortical radiate artery that branches off to go to each of the first capillary beds called a glomerulus. That's the very first capillary bed, a ball of blood vessels. The branch leading to there is called an afferent arteriole. Well, afferent, but we'll overpronounce it. An afferent arteriole. The job of this glomerulus now is, with high blood pressure, to shove water and all of the dissolved substance into the tube system, where I will begin removing all of the stuff my body wants to keep, and when I am done, I will dump it into my drainage system at a minor calyx. As we look at this tube system, the simplest way to do it, I have my Bowman's or glomerular capsule surrounds this glomerulus. The high pressure shoves the water into this collecting area, which goes into a tube system. Tube system is broken down into three distinct areas. The first distinct area is the proximal convoluted tubule. Twists all over the place, and it's closest to my glomerulus. This is where I literally take most of the good stuff out. From there, it goes into this long, thin tube called the loop of Henle. Two parts to it. You have a descending loop of Henle, which you will notice gets very thin, and the ascending loop of Henle, which we find tends to become thicker, and it depends on the model what it looks like. After the loop of Henle is where I go to the distal convoluted tubule. Twists all over the place. At this distal convoluted tubule, I then drain into a collecting duct, which collects from lots and lots and lots of distal convoluted tubules, and it progresses down all the way through the renal pyramid till I get to the very tip of the pyramid called the renal papilla. And I can still remove water along the entire length of here. The next part we're going to look at is, do I have a good one? This is the best I'm going to find, I think, on these models. We find that this afferent arteriole that goes into my glomerulus, this is not a dead-end system. I don't shove everything out of here. The blood that is left over has to leave this system, so it comes out through an efferent blood vessel. If I move over to this efferent side over here, it doesn't look like it was separated here. We go into the glomerulus, then the efferent arteriole comes out, and it has two choices on what it does. If it stays around the proximal and distal convoluted tubules in the renal cortex, it is called a peritubular capillary. If, however, the efferent arteriole goes down into the renal pyramid where it will surround the loops of Henle, these vessels are very straight, and so they are called the vasa recta. End result, whether it comes from the peritubular capillaries or the vasa recta, it drains into an arcuate vein. This arcuate vein then drains into an interlobar vein that drains into the lobar vein that drains into my renal vein. And that's the blood supply. A couple of more little things to look at of the details on this model. We see the glomerular capsule. We know that the tube that leads from it is the proximal convoluted tubule. We know that the afferent arteriole brings blood into the glomerulus, this ball of capsules, and it leaves through an efferent arteriole before it breaks down to the two sets of capillary beds. We discussed the fact that always, as the loop of Henle is returning back into the cortex, it will always touch the afferent arteriole. Inside the loop of Henle at that point, just as we reach the distal convoluted tubule, we have a thickened group of cells, a macula, a thick flat spot, densa, macula densa, that literally are reading the composition of the stuff that is my filtrate at this point. Depending on what it finds, it talks to a group of cells that surround primarily the afferent arteriole, but also the efferent, called the juxtaglomerular cells. These juxtaglomerular cells make lots of decisions based on what the macula densa tells it. And among the things it does is it can literally talk to a group of cells that we find scattered all through around these glomerular capillaries, called mesangial cells. The mesangial cells' primary job is to talk to these, quote, foot cells called a podocyte that surround the glomerular capillaries. Remember, this is very high pressure. These capillaries could get blown apart. So I have these podocytes that have little pedicels or little toes on them. The mesangial cells are the ones that tell these guys how tight to squeeze. Whether or not I move my toes apart, let more stuff run out, or tighten down, don't let stuff run out.
And this duct,
that's minor calyx.
So this is going to lead.
This is the proximal convoluted tubule.
Okay.
Here's my glomerular capsule.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my glomerular capsule that leads to a proximal convoluted tubule.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my proximal convoluted tubule.
Okay. And that'll be a wrap.